Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for making time to join our conversation today. My name is Esther Aoko, and I work at Global Fund for Children as a marketing and communications associate. And I'll be facilitating this wonderful conversation alongside my amazing panelists, who I will give an opportunity to introduce after I give a brief overview of the conversation. So in case you are new to Global Fund for Children, just to give you an overview of what we do. So Global Fund for Children supports community-based organizations around the world that protect and improve the lives of children and youth in their own communities. We help these organizations get better at what they do by providing flexible funding, coaching, and connections that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And we collectively envision a future where all children and youth are safe, strong, and valued. And at the very end, we will be sharing the links to our different social media platforms so that you can be able to continuously to follow up on the updates on our work and our partners' work as well. So I will give a brief overview of the session so that you can also know what to expect during the conversation, and then I'll pass on to our amazing panelists to introduce themselves so that you can get to know them a little bit better before we start the conversation. So, as you might have seen as we were sharing, the title of this conversation today is Who Defines Safety? And a call to decolonize safeguarding. So, safeguarding is often understood as protecting children and vulnerable populations from abuse, exploitation, neglect, or harm. But too often, safeguarding has been defined through external compliance-driven frameworks, especially European models that don't always reflect local realities of different communities. And today's conversation is about exploring how we can rethink safeguarding by centering community voices, trust, care, and dignity. And during this conversation, we will also share Global Fund for Children's new approach to safeguarding and how we are working with our community-based partners to co-create practices that are more locally relevant and rooted in equity. So some of the things that we hope to share during this session is what decolonizing safeguarding means and why it matters, how Global Fund for Children and our community-based partners are shifting from compliance to care-centered practices, and also share some concrete examples from some of the regions that we work in, for example, Africa and Latin America. So I would now love to pass it on to our amazing panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then we will start off the conversation. And before I do that, in case you've just joined, we have Spanish translation. If you would like to listen to the conversation in Spanish, feel free to click on the icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation, and you'll be able to access the Spanish translation. I will pass it on to Vicky to start us off.
Thanks, Esther. And hello, everyone. It's so nice to see some old friends and also new friends in the attendees. My name is Vicky Ferguson, and I have the privilege of being the Director of Global Safeguarding at Global Fund for Children.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Sylvia?
Thank you, Esther. Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvia Morwabe. I also work with the Global Fund for Children team as the Program Officer for Africa, and I am glad to be here this evening. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Ximena?
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buen día desde
Hi
la Ciudad de
everyone,
México.
good morning from
Quisiera
Mexico.
nombrar que
I
esta
wanted to
participación
mention
también
that
estará
this
siendo en español
participation
por
will be
temas
also
de
given in
justicia lingüística
Spanish
como parte
to
del
talk
proceso de
about
decolonización que
language justice
tenemos
and
al interior de la
especially talking
organización
about
del
this
Fondo Global para la Niñez.
topic of
Yo soy oficial de programas para el equipo
I am the
Américas y estoy
official
muy
of
emocionada de poder
programs
tener
for
esta
the
conversación
Americas,
con
and I'm
ustedes.
really excited to have this conversation here.
Thank you so much, Ximena. And we will have Patricia as our interpreter today. So just to recap again, we do have Spanish translation. Feel free to click on the icon at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to access it. So just a few information for you as well. We will be having a question and answer session at the very end of our conversation, and you can access the Q&A function at the very bottom of your screen. It is tagged as Q&A, and you can be able to put your questions there, and the panelists will address them at the very end of the conversation. So if in case something comes up during the conversation, just type it right there, and we will review it at the end of the conversation and just respond to some of the questions that will be put in there. So I would like to kick off the conversation, and if you've just joined, welcome to our conversation. We'll now be going into the questions for the panelists, and we'll have various questions that are targeted to each of the panelists, and questions that are general, just so they can be able to get more from this conversation. So I will start with a question to all the panelists, and just thinking about how safeguarding can mean different things to different people. And we would like to get an understanding of how do each of you personally define safeguarding in the context of your work, and what does a safe environment look like to you? And we can start with Ximena.
Muchas gracias, Esther, por
Thank
la
you very
pregunta.
much,
Creo que
Esther, for the
ha sido un
question. I
proceso
think
de
it
mucha
has been a
reflexión en
process of a lot of
conjunto con las
reflection
organizaciones y con las
with other
comunidades con las que
organizations and
colaboramos.
communities that we work
Ha
with.
sido mucha escucha y ha
It
sido un
has
proceso
taken
de
a lot of
intercambio de
listening and a
saberes. Y
process
creo
and
que
exchanging of
algunos elementos
knowledge.
que hemos podido
And there are
trazar en
some
nuestro
elements
camino
that
es
we
el
have been
elemento
able
de
to
centrar el
have.
bienestar
It's
desde las
to
perspectivas de las
center the
propias
well-being from
comunidades,
the
¿no? Más allá
perspective
de un
of the
concepto
communities, more
occidental impuesto que
above
puede
than the
incluso causar
concept
daño. ¿Qué es lo que el
from
bienestar
other
significa
areas.
para cada
So we
comunidad,
have
para
to
cada
think, what does
organización, para cada
well-being mean
contexto?
for each
Y a
community,
partir
for
de
each
eso,
context?
ir
And
también
from
identificando qué
there,
prácticas ya
identify what
existen en
practices
estas
already
comunidades.
exist in
Entonces,
these
por
communities.
ahí hemos empezado un poco esta
And we
conversación,
have
esta reflexión, y
began
que
this
creo que
reflection and
también ha habido
conversation, and
una
I
postura
think
crítica,
there
¿no?
has
En
been a
Latinoamérica sobre el concepto
uh,
de
critical
salvaguarda desde una perspectiva
posture of
punitivista, de vigilancia, ¿no? Que tal vez
safeguarding
no
that
resuena
has
con las
been a little bit more
estructuras
punitive,
sociales
that
que
don't
existen en nuestro
necessarily
contexto.
resolve social issues in our context.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ximena, for sharing that. I will pass it on to Sylvia.
Thanks, Esther. When I think of safeguarding, I think of protecting individuals from harm, from abuse, from neglect, not just children, because I feel like a lot of time when we think about safeguarding, we're always thinking about children and how we can take care of them. And while that is a component of safeguarding, sometimes we forget that there are adults who are also vulnerable and who need that protection. So when I think safeguarding, I think protecting individuals from harm, from abuse, from neglect. And what a safe environment looks to me is where each of those components, so the youth, the children, the adults, in the context of our work, myself, my team, the people that we serve, where we are in a place where we can feel safe, where we can know that there's no harm or danger, that we are protected in case of any harm and danger that would come there, and we have the tools to deal with any such harm that may come into that space. So that's safeguarding to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Over to you, Vicky.
Thanks, Esther. And I think such a simple question is so complex when we think about safeguarding because the word itself is so deeply problematic. And the word itself represents really what we're talking about today. It's a word that can't be translated into so many languages that creates a silo when we're trying to do the work that Sylvia and Ximena have just spoken about, that it is this other thing because we don't use the words in our communities that really talk about care, safety, well-being, security, and protection. So it's such a simple question, but such a complex answer, sorry. For us at GFC, we define safeguarding under three pillars, which is prevention, promotion, and protection. So really making people aware of how we keep them safer, of reducing the risk of people being harmed, and then how we respond to any harm that we experience or the people that we work with experience. But what we really try and do with safeguarding is look at the risks that we face and build out instead of let's write a policy quickly and build in. So we really want a community or the work and build out when we think about what a safe environment looks. It wants to be holistic and bespoke to the work that we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vicky. And just as a follow-up to that question, what are some of the challenges that you have seen in the approach to safeguarding to date? And we can start with you, Vicky, just to continue, and then we can move on to Sylvia and Ximena.
Sure. I think particularly from a funder perspective, what we see a lot is a tick box exercise where we say, have you got a safeguarding policy? Yes, okay, you can have the money. Or no, okay, you need to write one within a year. And so what we see is, keeping people safer is a privilege. It is something that every community does and has done for thousands of years, long before we colonized the world and gave them our justice systems and we gave them our child protection systems and all of those things. Communities know how to keep people safe. But what we see is safeguarding has created something that silos that work, that work doesn't get embedded in safeguarding, but instead we create this system that works for us in the global minority. And we say, hey guys, do it like this. And so it kind of feels like communities are pushing against these rigid structures that don't actually work for them. And so going back to my earlier point, it's really important that we look holistically and individually. And actually then safeguarding feels relevant. It feels like you can step into it. And it feels meaningful to the communities that we're working with.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Vicky, for sharing that. Over to you, Sylvia.
Yes, thanks. Just to pick up from where Vicky has left off, one of the challenges that I've seen in safeguarding, and Vicky has spoken about from the funder's perspective. I've had the privilege of working as not a funder, but as an implementer. And one of the things that we see is you're told, okay, you need a safeguarding policy. You come up, as she said, tick box. You wanted a safeguarding policy, here is a safeguarding policy. So it becomes a document that we created because the donor wanted one. It's not one that we took that much time to think about the nuances of where we work, who we work with, how we want to protect them. It's just an external framework that we need to give out so that we seem compliant. And then it creates a disconnect between the work that we do and how we do it. So you have a partner that has a safeguarding document that was sent to Vicky at the beginning of the grant. Vicky looked at it and said, okay, good, you have a safeguarding plan. But that plan has never been used from that day. So the entire time we don't remember until one day something happens and you remember, oh, we had a plan. And you go to look at it because it's something probably we pulled out of Google and put it into a document. We can't follow any of those steps in the situation where we are to actually get a result that would help us or help the children or help the communities that we serve. So it becomes just something that is not a living, breathing document, but just another document on our shelves that does not keep anyone safe, not the staff, not the community. So that's one major challenge that I have seen in this work of, when it comes to that colonial safeguarding approach.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sylvia, and thank you for even sharing like very concrete examples. That is very insightful. I'll pass it over to Ximena.
Muchas gracias. Creo que hay muchas
Thank you.
resonancias con lo
I
que
think
comparten en
I
otros contextos,
I
en
agree with a
la
lot
agenda
of things
África
that
con las Américas.
other
Creo que
contexts
justo
with
como
Africa
comparte
and
Silvia,
Americas, as you
este
mentioned,
requisito de
Sylvia, this
entregar una política de
requirement of
salvaguarda, ¿no?
giving
Que
a
no
policy
responda a
of
las verdaderas
safeguarding
prácticas de las
that
comunidades es
don't
un daño que
answer
ya existe,
the
que
real
está en
needs of
las
the
prácticas de
communities.
las
It's already a
organizaciones
harm that
y que
exists
pues tenemos
in
que
the practices
también
of organizations
como
that
atenderlo, ¿no?
we have
Otros
to
dos retos
take care
que
of. Other
identificamos es
two
el
challenges that we have
entendimiento del concepto de
identified is
salvaguarda, ese
understanding of
concepto que
what
se siente
safeguarding
lejano, que no
means,
resuena,
that
que no
concept
responde.
that's
Entonces,
far away, that's
simplemente
not,
empezar a discutir
we don't
sobre
really know it.
salvaguarda
So
en algunos
discuss
de los
about what
talleres con
safeguarding means in
organizaciones
some
en
of
el sur
the
de
workshops
México,
with
pues
organizations
hablábamos
in
qué significa para ti salvaguarda.
southern Mexico.
Y las
We asked, what
organizaciones
does
decían,
safeguarding
pues
mean? And the
salvar y
organization
guardar,
said,
retener,
well, to
meter,
save
esconder.
and hide, to have something in a box that's not flexible, as Vicky mentioned. It's not holistic. It's not alive. It's a structure that does not respond to the dynamics of our communities. And the third challenge is also this concept of the North that do not respond to the mechanisms of the communities. For example, go to the police, go to the government, because the government, the police are the ones that are causing the harm. So there you have another level of
conversaciones
complexity
de
in this
salvaguardia en la región.
conversation of talking about safeguarding in the region.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ximena, and also thank you for sharing examples. I would now like to move on to Vicky. And Vicky, just thinking about how Global Fund for Children has recently introduced a new safeguarding approach to safeguarding. Just wondering if you could walk us through what has prompted that shift and what makes it different from more traditional and compliance-based models.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Esther. I joined GFC 2 years ago almost, and came into an organization that was really, really strong in safeguarding. It had a really great culture. Everyone was thinking about it, which is such a wonderful thing to walk into. But what I did when I joined is I did a lot of listening, and what I heard from my colleagues across the world was, we asked them to write a safeguarding policy within the year, but it's really hard, and we don't have the resource, and they don't really use it. And there was a lot of this sort of demand, but what were we getting back? And I'm very lucky that GFC, we like to think outside the box, and particularly in safeguarding. And so, we have over 400 partners in over 40 countries. Like, the fact that we had a one size all fits all approach seems really not in line with our thinking and being partner first, which is such a really important part of our values. So what we really wanted to do was, make the relationship with safeguarding, make the conversations really relevant and meaningful for our partners. And that's hard when there's so many of them and they're all around the world, and language and all of those things. But I think for us, it was really important to actually think about the partner. I'm going to say this a lot. Think about the partner, the program, the region, and work out, instead of me, a white middle class woman sat in London, dictating what I wanted from our partners around the world in terms of safeguarding. Because I won't be in most of those communities. I will never do the work that they do. I can be a support, a critical friend, a mentor, a guide, a thought partner. I can be all of those things or none of them. But what's really important is that our partners tell us how they want to make their communities safer, how they want to respond to incidents of harm, not us telling them. And so that was sort of where it started. So how are we going to do that? So we decided that each program has a different safeguarding approach. So we have a safeguarding plan that we create at the beginning of a program, and from that we agree that the journey that we will go on with our partners within safeguarding, and what that looks like, not just for our partners, but also for our programs teams, because it's really important that my amazing colleagues like Sylvia and Ximena and everyone else feel supported in that journey as well, because it's really hard having these conversations if you're not supported, and if you're not developed, if you're not, able to ask uncomfortable questions of me. So really thinking about it as a much more holistic way of working internally as well as with our partners. Sorry, that was a really long answer, Esther.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Vicky, for sharing GFC's safeguarding approach and what prompted the shift to the new approach. And just a follow-up question. So, safeguarding is often rooted in European frameworks. How is Global Fund for Children intentionally working to move away from that? And what does decolonizing safeguarding look like in practice from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks. So the first one, Esther, is language. And it sort of seems like a really simple point, but I'm going to use Sylvia and the amazing work she's doing with Thriving Through Play. When I was with the partners in July, and I asked the partners, who's got a policy that the children and young people can actually read in their own mother tongue? And very few creators said yes, because they're creating a document for funders, not for the right, or for partners, or externally. We're not, again, thinking about. So language is a huge part. We're really proud to say that GFC have our safeguarding policy in 9 languages now because of that, because that is real part. Accessibility is a huge part of decolonizing. I don't care what your policy looks like. What I care about is that it makes sense to your community and to the children and young people we work. So really working with language, really resourcing safeguarding, and safeguarding is not free. It is a huge, huge time and resource burden on our partners. To ask them to write a policy, I am a full-time director of safeguarding that has been working in safeguarding in some way for 20 years, and it took me a year to write GFC's new safeguarding policy. So really giving partners space and time, not dictating you have to have this document by this point, but really journeying with them where we can, resourcing local safeguarding experts to journey with them who understand context much better than me, who can do it in the language of that country, of that community, really thinking about what is it that community actually needs. Ximena's spoken, and she will more about police is a really good example of that. But we're not saying your referral pathways have to be look a certain way because we think you should go to the police. Really thinking about cultural community context that is relevant to those partners.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vicky. That was really powerfully said. And I would just like to pass it on to Ximena or Sylvia. Would you want to add any reflections to that? Yeah, if so, please go ahead. Yeah.
Creo que también parte de este
I
proceso
think that
ha
part of this
sido
process has
relevante abrir
been
espacios de diálogo
relevant
con
to
las
open
organizaciones,
conversation
tener
spaces
estos
with the organizations, to
conversaciones
have these
pues que pueden ser
spaces
muy profundas, muy
where that
duras,
can
que
be
llevan a
very
otros
deep, can
lugares
be
sobre
difficult, that
qué
takes us to
significa
other
cuidado, cómo es que las
spaces
comunidades se
to
cuidan,
talk about
pero más allá
what it
de
means to
pasar de
be
solamente
taken care of,
ya no hay que
but
hacer una
not
política de
just talking
salvaguarda
about
y
a
ya, sino, ok,
policy, a
no
safeguarding
hay una
policy,
política de
but talking
salvaguarda
about,
que se
okay, there
requiere,
we don't have
pero
this
qué es lo que
policy that we
las
need, but
organizaciones que
what
son
do
socios de Ferguson necesitan.
organizations that
Espacios de
are
escucha,
partners
espacios
of
de diálogo, qué es lo que
GFC, what do they
nosotras
need? Do they
también
need
podemos
spaces of
ofrecer desde GFC
listening, of
para que se puedan tener estas
conversation
conversaciones.
that we can give as GFC so those conversations can happen?
Okay, thank you so much, Ximena. Sylvia, do you want to add any reflections on this?
At this point, not much. I feel like Ximena and Vicky have really captured that point. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll move on to you, Sylvia. And just thinking about your work with community-based partners, especially across Africa, how do communities perceive safeguarding, and how do you see those definitions evolving when they are the ones shaping the definitions?
Good question. And I think it's sort of just segues very well from what Vicky and Ximena have just shared. When we have all this, like let me call it the old approach for this, for this context, and we see that other than communities just looking at it as a tick box exercise, then they stop thinking about what is it that is there in our community right now that we can start thinking about. So because safeguarding is an issue that, okay, the funder wants us to figure out, sometimes we are doing things that are safeguarding related, but we don't see it as such because it does not fit into the mold of, what we think traditional safeguarding should look like. Or we have all these ecosystems around us that we use to ensure that we are safe, that the communities we serve are safe, that the children we work with are safe, but we don't think, or rather we don't see it as, it's become so normal that we don't think it is really part of safeguarding. It's just something that we do. That's how we've always done things. So when you start thinking about safeguarding, you're thinking about something way out there that we can't see just, okay, these mechanisms that we use are actually helping us to stay safe and ensure that our environments are safe. So when we let our partners, we let the communities lead this process, then we are helping them to open their minds to all these things that are open in front of their eyes. So, like for instances, if I go to the police, it would not work. Maybe in my community, it wouldn't work. But there's another community where going to the police is your safest bet. So, and I know that's what I need to do. So helping them to see what is it that is there that is working for you. And once they're able to open their eyes to whatever is in front of them, then it becomes not just an external conversation. There's no longer that disconnect, but it's something that they do. What I'm thinking, for instance, in mind, I'm thinking of one partner that I have engaged with in our work where, working in the space of protection of women and girls against, harmful cultural practices. And, for all these things, most of the time it's very embedded in the community. So if you're working in a space, for instance, around Africa, where we have a lot of female genital cutting, for instance, or we're having early childhood marriage, if it's something that is really, really embedded and you're trying to speak up against this, your safeguarding might look different, based on what the Latin America will look at it, because maybe that's not a problem that they deal with. But how this community was able to get support and ensure that the girls that were running away and needed rescuing could get that help is looking within their system. You find that we have villages that have chiefs, and we have chiefs that are able to build that power, and people listen when the chief speaks. So if the chief says that, yes, girls are getting married at 14, then chances are they will get married at 14, and you will have a really hard time pushing back against that. But when you have the chiefs as your allies, the people that are helping you to spread the word and take care of these children, let them go to the schools, the girls and the boys and everything, then you have that system, and they will help you inform that when something happens and we hear that, there's this family that is trying to marry off a young girl, then you have the system in there that would be able to support you, because you might run to the police at that time, and the police, as much as they know it's a crime, may not have maybe something to do, because maybe it's their community. So many nuances to think about. But just they're able to think through and see what is the ecosystem that we have. How can this ecosystem help us in the work that we do? How can we work together? Because when we're working with this grassroots organization, the one thing that each has in mind is, how do I better serve my community? How do I lift up my community? We're all seeking to see a better community than the one that we found. And if we can work together towards that same goal and see who else can we borrow in, so that I'm not working as a silo on this end as Sylvia, Vicky is working on this end as a silo. We're doing the same thing, and none of us is getting results because we're just not collaborating. So in working with our partners, working in these communities, it is to help them to open their eyes, think outside the box, not just look at, okay, this is how it has been done, this is how someone else says we should do it, so because that's what they say we'll do, that's how we'll do it. But thinking, okay, this is how they say, will it work in my context? If it works in my context, well and good. If it does not work in my context, how can I modify it to take advantage of the resources that I already have to make it work within us, for us, and to bring out the results that we need? So just creating that bespoke system that speaks to the nuances of the community and addresses them.
Amazing. That was very powerfully said, Sylvia. And just as a follow-up question, so you have been involved in Global Fund for Children's collaboration with the Lego Foundation on the Thriving Through Play initiative. Just wanted for you to take us through how has funding, especially when it centers learning and equity, enabled more grounded and locally relevant safeguarding practices. And if you can, please share an example.
Okay. Thanks, Esther. As I think through that, I think Vicky mentioned it just a little bit earlier. With our partners, we have an amazing cohort of partners in Kenya and Uganda that we're working with under the Thriving Through Play. And one of the things that we have been working with them, even as we started with onboarding and all, is safeguarding. But this time it's different. We're not telling them we have a year, give us a safeguarding policy, we tick that box and we move. It's like, how are we moving with them to grow that safeguarding? So understanding from their perspective, what is the need that you have in your community? What is the safeguarding the safeguarding needs that you have, and how can we work with you to create a system that works for you and works for your team? So having Lego support us, because now we have that supporting in terms of funding to help our partners create a safeguarding system that works for them and speaks to their different nuances. So we don't expect that for partner A, in Nairobi and partner B in Gulu and partner C in Lira, that they will have the same safeguarding, because those three contexts are very, very, very different. So being able to work with them, creating that plan, walk that journey with them. So Vicky has a little bit more work on her hands to see to these partners and help them to see through what is it that they want to create. And we're co-creating it with them and just helping them see, how do we put it in language? I remember one of us saying, yes, we serve children who can't see and we don't have anything in Braille. How would we be able to put that in Braille so that they can access? So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and we are in the process of just working and starting that journey with them. And we are really excited to see how the rest of this journey goes on with them now that they get to lead the process of how they want safeguarding to look like in their different spaces.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And I would like to pass it on to Vicky or Ximena if you would like to add any reflections on it. Go ahead, Vicky.
So I came off mute so quick there. No, I think having, and it goes back to my earlier point about resourcing. Safeguarding isn't free. And to do this meaningfully as a funder, like, there's a responsibility to do this meaningfully. And what Lego has enabled us to do is journey with our partners over 3 years to do something much more meaningful than we've ever been able to do. So we will have a consultant in Uganda, a consultant in Kenya, really doing one-to-one support with these partners, having the time, but also creating spaces for training, for reflection, for community of practices. And I'm so excited that, because that's really when this gets, like, the good stuff happens, where the magic happens, where the magic of keeping communities meaningfully safe happens. And I just want a little story. When we were in Nairobi, and I was sat talking to one of our amazing partners, and they were in Nairobi, and we were talking about this language issue, and he was like, yeah, but so not all of them even speak Swahili. And I was like, well, then let's put it in Shen, which is like the local slang. And he was like, can we do that? I was like, this is, this thing of, can we do it? Are we allowed to write a policy like this? Are we allowed to do safeguarding in a certain way? We are not the safeguarding police. We are just there to facilitate meaningful ways for communities to be safer and for mechanisms to work for communities, and to really think that through. And I think Lego is enabling us to do that in such an exciting way. And we will be sharing that journey as we go, because I'm, as you can tell, very excited about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vicky. Very powerful contribution. Ximena, would you like to add anything?
No mucho. Creo que
No, not
resonamos
much. I
y
think
veo
that
muchas
I
similitudes entre los
see a lot of
contextos y estos
similarities in the
procesos que se están
context
llevando.
and the processes that we are having.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ximena. And we will now be moving on to getting to hear from you. So my first question would be, through your engagement with community-based organizations, in the Americas region, that is, what are some of the key lessons that you have learned about implementing safeguarding in ways that is culturally relevant and grounded in local realities?
Muchas gracias, Esther, por la pregunta. Creo que
Thank you, Esther, for the
algo elemental
question.
cuando empezamos estas conversaciones
One
es
basic
darnos cuenta de la
thing is
diversidad de conceptos y
realize the
entendimientos que se
diversity of
relacionan con
concepts and
salvaguarda,
understandings
cuidado
that are
colectivo,
related to
bienestar.
safeguarding
Solo
and
por dar un
well-being.
ejemplo, hace
Just to
una
give an
semana tuvimos un
example,
encuentro con la
about a week
iniciativa
ago,
de la
we
Fuerza
met
de
with
los
the
Niños,
initiative of
que
the
en el cual participaron
Girls
jóvenes,
Force,
niñas,
where
adolescentes
uh,
de la península
teenagers,
maya
girls
de Yucatán.
participated from
Y
the
ahí
Yucatan
justo
Peninsula,
hablando sobre qué significa
and
salvaguarda,
talking
qué
about what
significa
does
cuidado.
safeguarding
Una
mean, what does
compañera compartía, para mí,
well-being mean.
cuidado y
Somebody
salvaguarda
said,
tiene que ver
for
con
me,
mi
safeguarding
lengua materna, con el
means
maya, y tiene que
has
ver
to
con mi
do with
cultura. Y
my
eso nos
culture,
llevó
my
a
Maya
otra
culture,
esfera de
and that
reflexión de
took
lo que
us to
implica qué es lo que
another
queremos cuidar,
reflection.
a qué
What
le
is it that
queremos
we
poner
want to take
atención
care
cuando
of? What do
hablamos de
we want to
cuidar,
pay
de
attention to
cuidarnos
when we talk about
colectivamente.
taking
Entonces,
care of
una de
collectively?
estas
And
aprendizajes que hemos tenido
one of
es
these learnings that
que
we
el
had
concepto de salvaguarda o de
was the
cuidado puede ser
concept of
tan amplio
safeguarding
como
can
las
be
comunidades lo entiendan, y eso debe tener un
so
espacio
big,
dentro
and
de lo
so
que
there has to be
logremos
a space
aterrizar,
within where
escribir,
we
que
can
puede terminar siendo
achieve,
un
we can
manifiesto,
write,
no
we can
una
have maybe a
política, que puede
manifesto,
terminar
not a
siendo un video,
policy, but maybe it could be a video, maybe it could be a hip hop song, or it could be a poem, but that it's a collective understanding of what this organization, of what this community understands as safeguarding. So I think that is one of the first learnings. The second is that the practices of care already exist, as Vicky mentioned. These are ancestral knowledge that the grandparents and the communities have had for many years, and that are already part of the culture of the communities that we work with. And through the recognition of those practices that already exist, how can we have conversations to make them visible here? This is the route, this is the way of safeguarding. We don't have to develop anything else. This is what this community, this organization needs, and this is what we're going to work together. This is enough. We don't need to check a box to say, okay, you have a safeguarding policy when you're gonna hide it and it's never gonna be consulted. So let's make it visible. Let's listen and let's learn these practices that already exist. And that takes me to the third lesson or learning. How can we learn mutually from the different practices that exist? The dialogue between organizations that are part of the initiatives in GFC is very important. Maybe one organization recognizing that they have a practice and the other also do it, and they don't think, oh, hey, I also do that. So we take care of each other that way, and I hadn't seen it before. That's also a practice. So having this exchange between organizations and these connections are very important for this collective learning of what this safeguarding collectively means within the regions we work with.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ximena. Very powerfully said. And I would just like to share a follow-up question. So decolonizing safeguarding also means recognizing some of the historical harms and shifting power. And I would just like you to share in your experience, how do trust and relationship building contribute to this shift, especially in the Americas region?
Gracias, Esther. Creo que
Thank you, Esther.
partiendo de estas relaciones de confianza,
Talking about these
de estas
trust
relaciones que se van
relationships,
construyendo,
these
es
relationships
que
that are
las
being
organizaciones
built is
se
where
han
the
sentido
organizations
seguras en
have felt
acercarnos a
safe
compartirnos
in
ciertos contextos
coming
de
together and
riesgo que
share
pueden estar
certain
enfrentando, ¿no?
risk contexts that maybe they're
Normalmente también
facing.
hay que reconocer que
Usually,
existe
we
una
have to
relación de
recognize
poder
that there
entre
is
las
a power
financiadoras y las
dynamic
organizaciones.
relationship
Que
between
muchas veces las
funders
organizaciones
and the
están
organizations. And
condicionadas.
sometimes
Si tienen algún
organizations
tema
are
de riesgo,
conditioned if
si no
they
están
have a
protegiendo bien a las niñas y
risk, if they're
juventudes con
not
las que colaboran, si no es el escenario
protecting the
perfecto, se les quita
children,
el
if
financiamiento.
it's not
Y
the
ese
perfect
miedo existe por la
setting, so
relación
they
de
take
poder
away
que
the
hay entre
financing.
las
So
financiadoras y las
that exists because
organizaciones.
of the
Y
relationship.
gracias a la
And
confianza que hemos
thanks
tejido,
to
gracias
the
a los
trust that
espacios
we
de
have
escucha,
made, that we
gracias
have
a
built,
esta
thanks to the
perspectiva
spaces of
distinta que
listening,
estamos
this
tratando de
different
implementar con las
perspective that we are trying
organizaciones,
to
hemos
implement with the
podido tener
organizations,
ejemplos
we have
donde
been
las
able
organizaciones
to
nos
have
comparten,
examples where
estamos teniendo
organizations
esta situación
share,
de
we are
riesgo,
having this
estamos enfrentando
problem, this risk, we are facing
cuestiones, ¿qué podemos
these
hacer? ¿No? Y
issues,
que
what can we
GFC
do?
pueda
And that
escuchar
GFC can
desde
actually
otra perspectiva,
listen
desde
from
otro
another perspective,
entendimiento, no
from another
condicionando el
understanding,
financiamiento,
not
sino acercando
conditioning
recursos
the
que pueden
financing, but
ser desde
bringing
financiamiento de
resources
emergencia, ¿no?
closer
Nuestras
that
subvenciones de
can
emergencia que
be
pueden cubrir ciertas
emergency financing
necesidades
that
como
can cover
comprar
certain
cámaras de
needs like
seguridad,
buying
comprar equipo de
a camera for
computación, ¿no?
securities or communication
financiamiento que
equipment.
puede ser
So this
enfocado a eso,
financing that can
pero
be
también,
focused on
ok,
that.
existen
But
estas
okay,
capacitaciones,
these
existen estos
trainings
talleres, existen
exist, these
estos otros
workshops
recursos no
exist, these
financieros que
other
GFC
resources that are
puede
not
acercar para
directly
que puedas
financial
enfrentar esta
that GFC
situación de
can
riesgo. Creo
provide
que
that can help
esa es una
them
de las cosas que nos
face.
ha permitido
So I think
explorar
that's one of the
mucho
things
el
that have
tejer estas
allowed us
relaciones de
to
confianza
explore,
y que después eso
weave
se
these
traduce en un
relationships,
aprendizaje no
and that
solo para la
translates
organización,
into a learning
sino
not
para
just for the
las
organization, but
iniciativas
for the
concretas,
initiatives
donde las organizaciones que
where the
enfrentaron esa situación de
organizations
riesgo
that face that
comparten la experiencia
situation
y
share
ponen
the
en la mesa
experience
el
and they put
aprendizaje.
it they put the learning. So with this situation, we have this learning, and we hope that it works for other organizations. And that's the great thing about these conversations, where we feel safe to share. And from a perspective that being headed by indigenous communities, by perspective feminists, from other perspectives, to understand how to face the risk. It's very rich and help achieve these experiences when you have this trust in this long-term relationship.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ximena. Powerfully said yet again. And just before we move on to the closing questions, when we will get to hear from our panelists on how to forge a way forward, I would like to remind everyone that we do have a question and answers section when you go to the very bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll be able to see an icon that says Q&A. And you can be able to tap on that and write your question there, and we'll be able to address it. So we are almost at the question and answer section. So in case you have any questions that you would like to ask, feel free to put it there, and we'll be able to address it after our closing question. So at this moment, I would just like to pass on to our panelists to just share. And as we continue on this journey towards decolonizing safeguarding, what is one principle or shift you believe is essential for the philanthropic and development sectors to embrace? And we can start with Sylvia.
Thanks, Esther. And sorry, just before I answer your question, as Ximena was speaking, something came to mind, and it's when we're looking at safeguarding, I think one of the things that sometimes maybe we fail to realize, and she brought it out well, is that there's usually that power dynamic that we have between the donor and the grantee. It may not be as loud, but it's implied, it is there. And based on how we handle that, it's part of decolonizing is finding ways and structures that break down that power dynamic and bring back the power to the people that we're trying to serve. Because if we do not do that, then what happens is we have a situation where even if there's an issue and they need assistance, and there's a safeguarding issue, maybe they can't find, and even the mechanisms are not working, they will not call me. They will not call Vicky. They will not come back to us to say, okay, I'm struggling with this. We don't know what to do. How do we handle it? Because they're thinking, oh my goodness, if we go back there, then maybe our funding will be cut, or what happens? How will they see us? Think about it in terms of just even for those who are parents, like, you don't want your children to fear you to an extent where that if they're in trouble, instead of coming to you and saying, I'm in trouble, I need help, they try to hide, because that could potentially lead them to getting into more trouble, because they do not have that safe environment where they can come back to mom and dad and say, this is what is happening. So building trust, and that's one of the things I love about GFC's model, is just building that trust, and building trust equals building that relationship with our partners to an extent where we realize that we are working in this journey with them. We're not here as a taskmaster, as a headmaster to check, have you done your homework today? You've not done your homework, punishment, you go to detention, or you'll watch those who are in Kenya. That's not what we're here to do. We are here to build that relationship and help you to grow, help you to be the best that you can be, help you to serve your community, and equip you with the skills and the tools that you need to do what you do better, and be there as a supportive, critical friend. So that, yes, if we see something that is off, we'll be able to come back and say, can we think about this? Is there a way that we can make this better? And opening that door for you also to come back and say, maybe how this relationship is going is not the best. How do we work this out? And that helps, for them to know, to own that process, so that if there's ever a safeguarding issue, whether it involves internally, it involves the staff, or it involves the community that they serve, or however they are, they're able to come back if they're facing an issue, and we can work with them through that process towards ensuring that they get the solutions that they need. That being said, the one thing maybe that I'd want as the one principle shift that I'd want the philanthropic and development sectors to think about or take home at the end of this conversation, if you forget almost everything that we said. One thing with 2 points. One, there's no one size fits all. So stop looking at it in terms of, okay, so safeguarding should look the same. Yes, maybe it can in the same community, but even then it's different. But there's no one size fits all. Every community has their different contexts, different nuances. So let's stop looking at safeguarding as, okay, we have this tool, everyone should fit into it, and that's it. Let's open our eyes and see what is it that in the community and try to create those spaces. And once we're able to do that and empowering the community and remembering that because there's no one size fits all, then it requires us to actually listen and let the people that we are trying to keep safe lead that process. So tell us, what does safety look like to them? And then work with them to create that ecosystem and that structure that ensures that they feel safe, they feel seen, they feel heard, and they're able to thrive in the communities where they're in. So that's the takeaway I'd want people to walk out of here with. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for sharing that and also for sharing your reflections from what Ximena has shared earlier. So I'll pass it on to you, Vicky, and feel free to also share some reflections from what Ximena has shared. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Sylvia just had a mic drop moment. That was exceptional. I think for me, the principle, the value, the culture is to acknowledge that the global minority, the people that hold the money and the power, are not the experts in this. That we have created systems that work for us and imposed them on the countries that we colonized hundreds of years ago, and then are now saying, no, guys, you can only do it like this because this works for us. We've created this policy that looks a certain way. We've created this set of principles. Now, some of them are great principles, don't get me wrong, but we have to, as the global minority, global north, really take a step back and think about where does our responsibility lie? The growth of safeguarding has come from a space where bad things happen, and so perpetrated by large global north-based organizations and others before I get struck off, but we've enforced systems out of maybe not the best ways. And that's a hot take. I get that. But actually, what is it about? What can we change? What can we reflect on? How can we be more anti-racist in this? Let's use the word we're all skirting around. How can we be more anti-racist in our safeguarding practices? How can we be more feminist in these principles? How can we be more radical? How can we be braver? Because we ask organizations to tick our safeguarding policy box because it's easy. But what we've heard from Sylvia and Ximena and all of our partners around the world is it's easy for us, but we're putting the labor and the work on our grassroots partners because it's easy for us to tick a box and for them to do the work. Instead of, like what Sylvia said, is to journey with, to use our power responsibly and ethically and morally and journey with. And I think that's more than one principle. Sorry, Esther, but I think for me that it underpins everything. I love safeguarding. I have the best job in the world, but I also hate it because it is deeply problematic in the way it's grown and the way it's created. And it's such a privilege to be at GFC and to go on this journey like this, because I really feel like it is speaking in terms of the wider sector, in terms of, shifting power but actually really thinking what this means for community. Why should I dictate how someone keeps someone safe? I shouldn't. Why should I tell someone they have to do this? I shouldn't. And so really thinking about how can we uncenter ourselves and our risk of adversity, our fears to actually just be better for the communities that we're working with, we're funding, whatever that looks like in the work that we're doing.
Amazingly said. Thank you so much, Vicky. Over to you, Ximena.
Gracias,
Ximena.
gracias, colegas, porque creo que ambas
Thank you,
tuvieron ese
colleagues, because
momento
I
de
think
soltar
both
el
of you
micrófono
had that
diciendo
mic drop
palabras poderosas.
moment
Creo
saying
que para mí un
powerful
cambio,
words.
y
For
no,
me, a
y desde la experiencia
change,
en
and
el
from the
contexto de
experience in the
América Latina
context
es
of Latin
centrar
America,
el
is
conocimiento que ya existe en las
centralize the
comunidades
knowledge
y
that
centrar
already
la
exists
escucha
in the communities, and to
desde
center in the
financiadoras,
listening
desde
from
organizaciones, ¿no? La
financing, from
escucha, la apertura
organizations, the openness and the
y ponernos
listening, and
en una posición de aprendizaje y
be
de
in a
comunicación
position of
genuino,
learning
¿no?
and of
Creo que las
sharing, of
comunidades,
genuine
las
learning. I
organizaciones,
think
las niñeces, las
communities,
juventudes ya tienen
organizations,
mucha sabiduría
children
sobre cómo
already
cuidarse
have a
colectivamente.
lot of
Eso
knowledge
implica
of
incluso
how
la
to
relación
take care of
a
them
un cuidado
collectively,
individual
and that
desde lo
implies
comunitario. Entonces,
from
aprender,
an
escuchar,
individual
centrar esas
way
vivencias,
into a
centrar esas
community. So how to
experiencias
center
y
those
verlo como un proceso
experiences
vivo.
and see it
Ver
as
que
a
las
life
prácticas de
process,
cuidado van
see the
cambiando, que
practices
se van transformando, que
can
van
change, that
respondiendo
can
a los contextos y
transform,
que
they
tienen
respond
un
to the
centro
context,
de
and that have a
conocimiento
center of
ancestral o prácticas arraigadas
ancestral
comunitarias, pero que se van
knowledge,
transformando con el
but
paso del
that
tiempo.
can shape
Entonces creo que verlo como
as
un
time
proceso
goes by. So
vivo,
we have to see
como
it as a life
colectivo, como
process,
un
a
proceso
collective
centrado en la
process
escucha, es lo más
that's
importante
centered in
para
listening. And
transformar nuestro
I think that's the most
entendimiento
important
sobre
to
cuidado colectivo y
change the
bienestar,
understanding
¿no?
of
Que es el nombre que le hemos
well-being.
puesto desde
That
las
I think
Américas,
it's
ya no
the
salvaguarda, sino cuidado
name we
colectivo
have
y
put
bienestar.
it in Latin America, which is well-being.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ximena. And I would just like to open the floor to the panelists in case you would like to add anything before we move to the question and answer session. Awesome. So I will be reading out some of the questions, and feel free to take any that you would feel comfortable with. And the ones that are very direct to the specific experiences of the panelists, I'll direct them to the specific panels. So the first question that has come in through the question and answer section is how do you monitor if partners adhere to their safeguarding policies? Yeah.
Yeah, should I take that one? Yeah, I think it's interesting, and it goes back to, for me, like, what is our role at GFC? I'm not here to police our partners around, but what I am here to do is listen and be a critical friend, and work with them to meet the standards that they may need to meet, depending on what context they're working in, what country, what culture, all of those things. I think, and some of you may know Karen Walker-Simpson at the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative, and GFC is a really proud host of FSC. Karen will always say the best moments you get where you really understand a partner and how they're working is conversations, not documents. And I'm a true believer in that you can have the shiniest, brightest, sparkliest policy you've ever seen, but actually it might just be a shiny policy. Actually, conversations around this is so critical. And again, that's about capacity. It's about all of these complex things, and that will look different in every organization, particularly funders or large INGOs. Is the department adequately resourced to have these conversations? But I think it's really important that, okay, if your safeguarding policy isn't reflecting in the work, why, and what is it we can do? And again, that working collaboratively to really think about. So I don't think it's like a yes or no question. It's where are you at? Where do you need to be? How do we get you there? Acknowledging that a policy is just one tiny, tiny element of safeguarding. And the guys on this from GFC will always be sick of me hearing, how do we move from compliance to culture? How do we take a policy and make it a living, breathing piece of work? And that will look different in every organization. So for me, it's really, really about the conversations we have around policy and practice, and whether that really is working in real life. Another really geek out question then.
Thank you so much, Vicky, for that response. Any reflection from Ximena or Sylvia? Yeah, go ahead.
Creo que viendo a las niñeces y
I think
juventudes
looking
habitando
at
en
the
los
youth and
espacios de las
children being
organizaciones y
in the
las
spaces of the
comunidades de una
organizations
manera
and the
donde se
communities in a
sientan
way
seguras,
where
donde
they
se
feel
sienta el
safe,
bienestar,
where
¿no?
they
Que se pueda
feel
ver
you
como
could feel
parte
the
de una
well-being that you
cultura
could see as part of a
organizacional,
cult,
comunitaria, justo como
organizational
decía
culture,
Vicky.
communitary culture.
Ese es
That
el objetivo,
is the
creo, de todo este
objective, I
trabajo,
think,
que
of all
podamos
of this work,
aportar,
where we
escuchar,
can
acompañar y aprender de
contribute,
cómo las organizaciones
listen,
y
learn
las
of how
comunidades
organizations
navegan
and the
este camino
communities
para que todas las
navigate this
personas se sientan
journey so that
seguras, se
all
sientan bienvenidas,
people
se
feel
sientan
safe
en un
and
estado de
feel
bienestar. Y
welcome
ese es
and
el indicador,
in
creo
a
yo,
well-being.
el ver ese
I think that is
bienestar,
an indicator to see
esa
that
seguridad de las
well-being, that
personas
safety
participantes, niñas,
of the
juventudes, ¿no?
participating
También
people,
las otras personas
and of
involucradas en los
course,
procesos, creo que
all people
ese es el
involved in the
objetivo.
processes. I think that's the objective.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ximena, for sharing that. And I will pass it on to Vicky for this question. So, how do you relate the common approach to protection from sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and sexual harassment to decolonizing safeguarding? And also, is the common approach to protection from sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and sexual harassment, is it a colonized way of safeguarding?
Oof, big question. Okay, CAPSA, yeah. So, I mean, CAPSA has obviously come out from the development of sort of this new focus on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment that came out in the late, like 2018, 2019, although it was obviously around before. I think, we are looking, of course, when we're working with communities, we're looking at sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. It is a key theme that we see in most communities across the world. We know that where there is power, there is harm. And that is power from funders, from government, from bosses. Like, there is not a community in the world where we don't see sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. So it's really, again, thinking about how do we frame that in a way that makes sense. So again, it's about taking the time to really explain these very global minority technical terms and making them relevant to the communities. Decolonizing safeguarding isn't about scrapping global standards. They're there for a reason. It's about making them relevant, digestible, maybe not in jargon that doesn't translate. Me talking about translation again, it's like I'm obsessed. Really thinking about what does that look like. GFC has a really strong SEAH theme in our code of conduct. It's something we take really seriously. But for me, again, it's not about, what is your, it's about that conversation, training, meaningful ways of looking at it. So it's a really important thing for us. Again, we have to acknowledge that it is a approach that has been created in the UK and then shared globally. That is a theme in safeguarding. We create things in Europe and we enforce them on communities across the world. And that's the heart of neo-colonial safeguarding, isn't it? But it's not to say that these approaches aren't important. It's how do we make them relevant? How do we create systems that work in the communities, in the countries, in the organizations that we work with? I did a lot of hand gestures then. Sorry, Esther.
No, thank you so much, Vicky. That was amazing. And just recognizing that we are 3 minutes past time, we'll just be responding to two more questions and then wrap up the conversation, just to also respect the time that you have given us. Thank you so much for staying with us until this time. So for this specific question, I would like to pass it on to Sylvia. So one of the attendees has asked, how do we monitor the effectiveness of safeguarding infrastructures that have been put in place?
How do we monitor the effectiveness of the already existing safeguarding infrastructure? So one of the things that I'm thinking about, and I'm thinking about in the Kenyan context, because sometimes we have all these spaces, and I think we talked about it before, that if this happens, go to the police. If this happens, go to the chief. But then you find that sometimes going through that doesn't really get you the results that you need. So you want to do something different. So in terms of monitoring the infrastructure, I think it looks different in different communities. As I mentioned, the example that I gave, there's a community where you'd find that if I go through the chief, they can help me through the process. If I go through this other one, in this other community, the chief, for instance, may be the most corrupt person and maybe is the one that is receiving the bribes who keeps these cases from going forward, as we say here, going forward either to be prosecuted or to find solution. So it is to understand where you are, understanding the ecosystem, because it doesn't look the same. So if you are looking into it and learning that, okay, if I'm in this area and this person seems, or rather this established system that is supposed to help us, keep the community safe, keep ourselves safe, is already put there, but it's not working. What are the alternatives that I have? Because if we look deep enough, we'd find there's an alternative. And sometimes we find that the people that know that the systems don't work are the ones that always insist, you have to go through this way, you have to go through this way, because they know they have interest in that way to ensure that that system that doesn't work. But finding that alternative. So, for instance, if I think about it in this way and say, the system tells me that I need to go to Office A to report to get assistance in this, and I go to Office A, and the person that is in Office A is really not interested in hearing this case, is not interested in assisting. Fine. What do I do? There's an organization, for instance, that I know that we work with and a partner that are already doing this work. How can I reach out to this organization to help me to find what other systems do they use to go out there? Because you can find that maybe this Office A in my community, or rather in my location, can't help me, but the law allows me to go to a similar Office A in the neighboring community. Can I go there and see if they can help and come back? So looking about, and it requires a lot of networking. You can't do this by yourself. If your only ecosystem is you and the people that you serve, more often than not, you might find yourself running into bottlenecks and issues that you can't deal with. So who else do we know, and who else have we mapped out in the regions that we work with that do the same work that we can leverage on? They might have a connection that I don't have. It might be that the office works, but it's because Sylvia is sitting in that desk and Sylvia wants a bribe for her to be able to help you. So you can't go through Sylvia, but Sylvia works with Esther. And if you have Esther's contact, Esther follows the due process and ensures. So how do we bypass? How do we find a way to get to Esther without getting to Sylvia to get that thing? And it's due to networking. So don't try to do these things alone. A lot of the times in this space for our partners, we try to say that we do amazing work in our communities that we can, and that sometimes we struggle with because we're trying to do it by ourselves in our own silos. And there are very many other partners that are there to help us. So if we can come together and create that, and if the system doesn't work, find a way to advocate for it. So it's just leveraging on that network. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that wonderful response. And I will pass on to Ximena for our final question. But just in case we do not address your question directly, this conversation will be responding to it. We'll have like a follow-up reflection post on our LinkedIn and all our other social media platforms, where we'll also be responding to the question. And my colleague Vicky is also responding to some of the questions directly in the Q&A. So look out for some of the responses. But moving on to you, Ximena. So there's a question about how would safeguarding look like if it were entirely defined by communities themselves, and what are some of the risks and opportunities that might create?
Muchas gracias por la pregunta, y creo
Thank you
que
for the question.
es un nuevo mundo el
It's a new world
descubrir y
to be
reflexionar
able
en conjunto con las
to
comunidades
discover
qué
and
prácticas ya
reflect
existen.
along with the
Creo
communities
que,
of the
como
practices that
mencionaba
already
anteriormente,
exist.
lleva
As I
procesos
had
de
mentioned
reflexión
before,
mucho
it
más profundos que
it
a lo
takes
mejor tienen que ver con
processes
justicia
that
lingüística,
talk
con
about
protección y cuidado de
linguistic
la
justice,
cultura, protección y
protection
cuidado
of
de
the culture or the perspective of other perspectives, that a risk could be how to navigate that complexity and diversity and how to bring it to something concrete. And thank you. Thanks to these conversations and with a lot of time and with a lot of listening, we start understanding what are the practices that already exist in the communities, and framework is given that strengthen. Maybe also there is a lot of recognizing that a lot of the communities that we work with, they use verbal language instead of written language. So as Vicky said, it shouldn't be another thing for the organizations that we work with, but it can be something that from the people that follow, that accompany these processes, that we can systemize or that maybe share with the communities that we collaborate with. So navigate the diversity of concepts, of our understandings over safeguarding of safety, navigate the verbal language and other ways of sharing these practices are part of the work of decolonizing and relearning. How do we understand well-being and take on a responsibility or take accountability from us who have the resources to return some of that listening that we have from the communities. That is the way that we've been navigating it. And as I said, it could have many different ways. Maybe have something written doesn't work for some communities. So maybe we can make a podcast, a poem that could be through audios, and that is already a systematization. So imagine other ways, other possible ways. That's also important.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Ximena, for that powerful response. And just as we are closing, I would like to give a very big thank you to Vicky, Sylvia, and Ximena for sharing your powerful insights and experiences with us today. And thank you for everyone who has joined the conversation, asked questions, and reflected with us on this important topic. And we are apologizing for running a few minutes late. So what we have had today is that safeguarding cannot just be about compliance or checklists. It has to be about care, dignity, and accountability. And decolonizing safeguarding means shifting power by moving away from externally imposed frameworks and instead centering the voices and realities of the communities themselves, as we have clearly heard from our panelists. And it means grounding safeguarding in trust and relationships so that safety becomes a lived practice and not just a policy. And as we close, I would like to leave you with a reflection. So think about it. What does safety mean in your own context? And how can each of us contribute to approaches that honor local voices, build trust, and truly protect those most at risk? And at Global Fund for Children, we will continue to learn and grow in this journey alongside our community-based partners. And we invite you to stay connected with us for future conversations and resources. And my colleague will be sharing our different platforms that you can stay connected with us on the chat. So thank you once again for being part of this dialogue today. Together we can reimagine safeguarding not just as an external requirement, but as a transformative practice that leads to real safety for children, young people, and communities everywhere. Thank you for joining. Thank you for staying with us. It has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for all the questions that you have shared. We wish you a good evening and good afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.